What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Crypto Airborne in the house, dropping you guys the latest and greatest cryptocurrency news and updates. Today is March 16th, Austin 316. Stone Cold. You guys WWE fans? I used to back in the day, but yeah, today's March 16th. So yeah, shout out to Stone Cold Steve Austin. But yeah, got 2 minutes before we do head to the VGX Heroes Twitter Spaces AMA education session tonight. It's going to be basically a continuation of last week's part 2, History of Money, what the F is 1971, and to the current time right now. So I'm going to pull up the charts when they go through it. I did have to make this link public, so something a little bit different than my usual, because usually I go unlisted and then I make it public, but just for the reason so people can follow along in Twitter Spaces, they can go and I'll have the charts up on the screen for you guys. So let's do a quick market overview, like 1 minute. So market is doing pretty good right now, actually. We are up, let's see, refresh, up 4.1%. Last 24 hours, we did have the FOMC meeting today. I think prices really didn't have that much of an effect. It went down a little bit, but then, came back up. Bitcoin's at 41,126. The daily candle closes exactly in a minute from now. So yeah, everything's doing pretty good. ETH's up, 5.8%. Luna's up 0.55%, and Cardano up about 5%, sitting at 84 cents. Holidays, not going to go through it, but like I said, today is March 16th. Stone Cold Steve Austin. That's one of his taglines that he always had. So there you have it. See a green right now. Check out my favorites real quick. BGX doing pretty good, up 1.6%, sitting at about $1.69. But yeah, everything's doing pretty well. Like I said, I'm going to run through this as fast as I can. Crypto total market cap, 1.79 trillion on TradingView. We're almost at that 2 trillion mark. Let me refresh it here on CoinGecko, 1.9 trillion. So up 3.7% the last 24 hours. It's good to see that the market's, recovering after this FOMC meeting and, all the stuff that's going on in the world with Ukraine and Russia and whatnot. I know we'll be going over current events. So, Frankie and Aldo will be talking about that. Foreign affairs should be pretty good to see. But yeah, I got 8 o'clock on the dot. Bitcoin dominance sideways a little bit, 43.56%. Fear and greed. Let's refresh it. Let's see. Yesterday it was 24. We're now at fear 27. So I'm not really surprised because we had a pretty green day. So let's jump right into it. I got 8 o'clock on the dot. I'm going to pull up Edge because I get better audio there. And follow along. Feel free to, chime in the comments section. And yeah, enjoy, everybody.
All right, people are filing in. Got a few more coming up for the panel. There's Pepe. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming. It's much appreciated. Got Wonder Woman coming up. I think that might be it. I know we got a few more coming, but hope everybody's doing well. Hello, hello. Here. There's Floki. Let's get him up here. Who are we missing? I know we're missing somebody.
What's going on? What's going on? Sorry, I was tweeting the space out. get everybody up here. But yeah, we got a full panel tonight. Looking forward to it. If you could do us a favor and hit the bottom right plus button and tweet the space out, it'd be greatly appreciated. We're continuing on WTF happened in 1971 and the thread Floki has of all the charts. So we're going to start off on slide 522. Also, feel free to join Crypto Airborne's YouTube because he's going to be going through the charts live if it's easier for you to view that way, or both, whatever floats your boat. But yeah, looking forward to it.
So I pinned two tweets to the top. One is a quote tweet of the other. The first one with the cartoony Nixon, that has the link to Crypto Airborne's private stream. If you are by a computer, I recommend you guys pull that up on your computer while listening to the spaces on your phone. The other one I posted up there is just what the quote tweet is that has all the slides. I'm going to try something different this time. I'm going to try to add each slide or tweet that we're on of this as we go through it. So the first one that we're going to jump back in on is slide 5. So I'm just going to go ahead and pin that one too.
Love it. Love it. Is Michael bugged for anybody? He's just showing as like requesting to co-host on my screen.
It shows regular on mine as it normally does. I haven't heard him say anything yet, but it looks okay.
Yeah, it shows co-host for me.
Yeah, I just don't see the muted mic. If he's obviously not talking, he may have some issues. I know sometimes it does get buggy.
All good. Give a few more minutes, and then we'll get going.
So, Michael, can you hear us?
I don't see him responding in Discord either, so I think maybe we should just get started with introductions. He'll figure it out. I'm sure he'll get back to us.
Okay.
If you want to get rolling.
He messaged me. He says he's showing as co-host but no mic, so we can go ahead and I'll help him get figured out.
Sounds good. Well, I'm going to give the normal spill. So with VGX Heroes, it's our weekly educational AMA. Not financial advice. We're not Voyager employees. We're the part of the education team within the Discord and the VGX Heroes. There's a lot of different ways to help out. If you're interested in doing more for the community, reach out. We'd love to have y'all. So this was created from a hero that unfortunately passed away, Hero Reeves. His focus for the VGX Heroes was education and helping new people and intermediate investors learn more, be able to make their own informed decisions, and just help spread knowledge, and always leave the world a better place than you found it, and spread positivity. I'm Pepe Stallone, VGX Hero 10, and I'll pass it over to Frankie.
Thanks, Pep. Frankie here, VGX Hero Jack Nicholson, and I'm going to be coming at you with some current events today.
Looking forward to it, my friend, and we'll roll it over to Aldo.
Hey, good evening, everybody. I'm Aldo the Apache, and tonight I will be discussing foreign affairs.
And a familiar face around the VGX Heroes. Glad to have you up here, my friend, Felix.
What's up, everybody? Really happy to be here with my education folks. It's been a while since those first couple of early education spaces. Really proud and happy to see what it's become. It's really amazing. We're going to be covering some social movements and some labor stuff in this, what that happened in 1971 type stuff.
Love it, and looking forward to your knowledge. Wonder Woman, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing well, Pepe. Really glad to be here. Hey, y'all, I'm Diana, or Wonder Woman, and I have a little more of a social, political, sociology type perspective on this.
Sounds great. Looking forward to it. Floki, my guy.
What's going on, everybody? I'm just a crypto Viking here for the ride and to learn with all you guys. Happy to be here. This has been one of the more enjoyable discussion topics. You know, the first time I think we've gone into a part 2 series, so we might even go to part 3 depending on how well this goes. But happy to be here.
Love it. And Sun Tzu, the noble hero behind the VGX Hero Twitter account.
Hello, I am Sun Tzu, and I am helping Michael. Hopefully he'll be here soon. Thank you all for coming.
Those dang boomers just can't figure out technology. But yeah, while we're waiting on Michael, Frankie, you can go ahead and get it kicked off with current events, my friend.
Thanks, Pepe. Man, Boomer, you're really upset about those glasses, man. Anyway, let's start off with Fed today. After some early volatility in the markets, and putting aside Ukraine, Russia, and the potential for World War III, so as the market to digest the FOMC statement and listen to Powell. Initially, there were no surprises when the Fed announced the 25 basis point rate hike. Just as expected, most likely a late move because the last time CPI was 7.9%, the Fed funds was 13%. So they had more tools in their bag. But the Fed also boosted its dots so high, it effectively confirmed what the market had been saying all along. The Fed now expects 6 more rate hikes in 2022, or 1 rate hike at every meeting. As a result, risk assets, gold, oil, and all others, such as crypto, tumbled, as did yields, even though 7 hikes is precisely what the market had been asking for since, I don't know when, last year. However, once the Fed confirmed that the market was right, guess what happened? Rate hike odds tumbled. Why? Because the Fed effectively had painted themselves into a corner. I know I sound like a broken record, but what is happening now is there a large showdown of growth coupled with a surge of inflation, the most likely outcome being stagflation. By the way, this is a lot of words that just says we're kind of screwed in the short term. This immediately manifested itself into a plunge in all yields. I mean, the whole yield curve panicked, which confirms that the Fed had not a fucking clue, because again, it was trapped long before today's rate hike, and it'll be forced to ease or resume quantitative easing in the not too distant future, even as inflation continues to rage. Translation, again, policy fucking error. And while oil did indeed drop, just wait for the market to remember that 3 million barrels of Russian oil are now gone from circulation. And the Fed's policy errors, economic slowdowns traditionally lead to less demand. The policy error was not lost on either gold, which after dropping in knee-jerk reaction to the hawkish statement, has since bounced to session highs in anticipation of the coming easing, or cryptos, which similarly rebounded strongly after tumbling after the statements. And this error certainly wasn't lost on stocks, which after tumbling initially reversed sharply once it emerged that the market is now pricing in rate cuts and recovered more than 100 points. Again, the Fed is trapped. And while Powell really has no choice but to keep hiking in the coming months in hopes he will induce a modest recession to crush commodity demand, every incremental rate hike will invert the curve more. So, in conclusion, we are screwed again, because the more hawkish Powell gets, the bigger the liquidity fire hose he will have to unleash in a few months when the economy plummets into an all-out recession, if not depression. Again, back in the 80s, when we had this situation and the CPI was at 7.9%, we also had interest rates at 13%. So we had more to play with. So in conclusion, buy Bitcoin. All right. Anecdotally, I've seen people on Twitter and in real life complain that even though oil has dropped from roughly $130 a barrel to roughly, I think today was $95 a barrel, They're not seeing the drop at the pump and attribute this to corporate greed, most famously a certain senator from Massachusetts. So, I mean, if we're being intellectually honest here, I think it warrants a little discussion on how future oil prices work. So we all know filling up your tank isn't cheap right now. Last week, a barrel of crude topped 130 bucks. Since then, the prices dipped below 100 and into correction territory, but at the gas pump, average prices have fallen from $4.33 a gallon to, wait for it, $4.32. So is this just the greedy oil companies that are taking the American people for a ride just to line their pockets with a few extra $1 billion, or is there something more? Well, getting into kind of how the futures works, the specifications for crude oil futures contracts are set in a way that allows the market participants to trade them uniformly. So each contract covers 100 barrels of oil, and dates for delivery are available for like anywhere up to 9 years into the future, on a monthly basis or weekly basis. I'm not sure on the specifics. At some point during the delivery month, the seller must deliver the oil to the buyer at the pipeline or storage facility in the energy hub of Cushing, Oklahoma, with official transfer title accompanying the actual physical movement of oil. So, long story short, if traders usually trade up until the delivery date, otherwise they're screwed with 1,000 barrels of oil on the front step. So the primary purpose of crude oil. Sorry, Pep, are raising your hand or?
No, go ahead and finish with the oil. I have a question afterward.
Okay. So the primary purpose of crude oil futures is to connect producers of oil with consumers of oil. Oil producers can sell future contracts that they match to their expected future production, and by doing so, they can effectively lock in a price. So although futures contracts prices change every day, a seller receives financial credit when futures goes up or goes down rather, offsetting the drop in oil's market price. For instance, if a contract falls from $50 a barrel to $49, then the seller will get $1,000 credit, because remember, it's 1,000 barrels, so 1 times 1,000 is 1,000. Corresponding to the $1 decline multiplied by so buyers who need crude oil, on the other hand, such as refinery companies, can ensure that they have adequate future supplies and lock in favorable pricing. For buyers, the finances of futures work in the opposite direction. Rising prices give them a financial credit, while falling prices cost them. The net effect, though, is to set the prices actually paid for the oil at the level at which the buyer enters into the future contract in the first place. So this is kind of a long-winded answer. So seeing that reflected as cheaper gas, will take time, because the gas that we are paying today at the pump actually reflects the price of crude that refineries purchased weeks ago. So in conclusion, politicians are wrong. It's not corporate greed so much. If anything, they've attributed to the price of oil going up, the politicians, if anything, have attributed to the price going up, basically making the money printer go burr. And I don't know if anyone's seen this. I saw it briefly, but it looks like Congress just passed a bill that increased all their salaries 21% for next year, I believe, or for the rest of the remainder of the year. So, Pep, I just wanted to get into the Loomis bill, but if you had a question.
No, I can wait. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. The last thing, a new bill from Senator Senator Loomis seeks to overhaul how cryptocurrency can be taxed within the U.S. One of its biggest aims is to provide guidance about capital gains related to crypto mining, staking, and spending. So if you're not aware, capital gains represents the increase in value from when you purchase an asset to when you sell it. Conversely, capital losses represent a decrease in value. The U.S. taxes net gains on assets such as crypto. Problem that many people unwittingly face, however, is the whole slew of common instances are, in fact, taxable events. For starters, paying for something in Bitcoin or another coin equates to selling it in the IRS's eyes. Ugh, that's a mouthful. So if you bought a Bitcoin when the coin was at 20,000, and purchased the Tesla, I don't know why you would, with the Bitcoin while it went up to 35,000, you'd be hit with capital gains on the $15,000 difference. So not only would you be out a coin for the car, you'd also be paying an additional capital gains tax on the 15 grand difference. The bill would do several things on this count. First, it would provide a tax exclusion of up to $600, so crypto users wouldn't be hit with a tax bill for buying a cup of coffee, which would start to introduce a larger Bitcoin economy, naturally. While Loomis said she would prefer it to be higher, the exact amount could actually end up being lower because, it's the Senate, and it's, why would they lower their tax bills? Second, the bill would clarify that the capital gains don't apply to productive activities such as mining, staking, because you're not getting rid of the asset. The bill would also allow people to exit retirement schemes, such as the 401ks, IRAs, and reinvest the money into cryptocurrency without taking a big tax bill or doing some creative accounting stuff. Finally, it seeks to codify Loomis's and Senator Ron Wyden's unsuccessful amendment in the $1 trillion infrastructure bill a few months ago that was signed into law last year. According to industry advocates and the senator, a provision within that bill which defined brokers to include crypto actors, so like basically hardware wallet manufacturers, was overly broad. Naturally, it could read to be require Bitcoin miners and proof of stake validators to provide the IRS with tax information on us, their users. That's hopefully she gets some stuff done in the Senate. It would provide some big news for us.
Yeah, great stuff. And I can speak for all of us, and we appreciate you breaking down a lot of information quickly and really easy to break down. But my question is, we hear a lot about inflation and somewhat deflation, but could you kind of speak on stagnation and what that would mean for an economy?
Sorry, I was on mic. So basically, the definition of it is basically the state of not flowing or moving. So lack of activity, lack of GDP. The economy is basically at a standstill, to be at the most basic. So basically, you have people sitting at home. Is the simple answer.
Pepe, were you asking about stagflation or just general stagnation?
Well, he just mentioned earlier about stagnation or wait, you have me confused now. But so I was just going to touch on it real quick for those who maybe didn't know what that meant.
It was stagnation. So I guess a different way. A different way to state it is a period of basically little or no growth in the economy. I think technical definitions less than an economic growth rate of less than 3% annually, or 2%, something like that. And it's highlighted by periods of high unemployment.
Yeah, that covers it. I appreciate it. I just wanted to quick, but yeah, we can move on over to Aldo if you're finished.
Yeah. Hey, good evening, everybody. I'm going to be covering the foreign affairs update for March 16th. Today marks the third week of armed conflict in Ukraine. Today, the World Court, also known as the International Court of Justice, IJC, ruled that the Russian Federation shall immediately suspend military operations in Ukraine. However, while this ruling is binding legally, there's no method for enforcement, so it's essentially teethless and unenforceable, ineffectual. Markets have been up slightly recently with talks and negotiations between Russia and Ukraine. However, no ceasefire has been achieved. So that's where we're at there. In Russia, today, Russia nationalized all Western-owned planes currently in Russia. What that means is all of the Western, international aircraft, like Boeing 757s, Airbuses, all of that that's there, they essentially nationalized and have captured. This is in response to U.S. and Western sanctions. They have taken control of 500 airplanes, and one expert says this is the largest single civil fleet destruction activity in the history of aviation, and that these aircraft will never operate as part of the global fleet again. What he means by they will never operate as part of the global fleet again is significant. One, Russia's never going to give them over. They're never going to give them back to the West, okay? And even if they did give them back to the West wouldn't use them because they wouldn't be able to certify that maintenance, appropriate maintenance was administered during or under Russia's supervision. So that's 500 airplanes that are just out of circulation, and Russia's going to utilize those for domestic travel. So they have captured those in response to our sanctions. Most of these are owned by Western leasing companies, which have canceled contracts and validated insurance, and they have asked for the aircraft back, but that's not going to happen. So let me scroll down here. Russia actually added amendments to the Russian Air Code and some other legislative acts that make it possible for Russian airlines to keep the foreign aircraft. So they're basically going back, ipso facto, they're going back and making this legal. All right, and they're amending their laws to allow them to incorporate this into the Russian air fleet. And the purpose of this is aimed at preserving the foreign airplane fleet with Russian operators for purposes of smooth transition to civil aviation as part of anti-sanction measures. Moving to Asia, today there was a 7.4 earthquake in Japan that struck right off the coast of Fukushima. This immediately triggered a tsunami advisory, but fortunately that has abated and there's no longer a threat of a tsunami there, thank God. If you remember in 2011, a 9.0 earthquake struck near Fukushima, which caused a nuclear reactor meltdown, which has rendered many areas in the region uninhabitable to this day. There were alarms that went off at 2 of the 4 active nuclear sites in northern Japan. However, there were no meltdowns and there were no casualties. It's important to note, however, that those nuclear reactors are in the process of being decommissioned. I didn't dig into it too much further, but I believe Japan is decommissioning their at least these 4, if not all, nuclear power plants. Also in Asia, a UN report came out today accusing the Myanmar army of war crimes, torture, and killings. The report stated that at least 1,600 people have been killed by security forces and their affiliates, and more than 12,500 people had been detained. At least 440,000 others have been displaced, and 14 million need urgent humanitarian assistance, the delivery of which has been largely blocked by the military and new and pre-existing areas of need, said the report. Also in Asia, in North Korea, North Korea launched a missile unsuccessfully today. It reportedly failed immediately after launch, according to South Korean military officials. This is prohibited by the UN. North Korea is not allowed to conduct ballistic or nuclear weapons tests, and according to UN sanctions. The North had put a moratorium on testing long-range ballistic missiles and nuclear tests after talks with then U.S. President Donald Trump. But in 2020, President Kim announced he was no longer bound by this promise. So he just changed his mind now, and that moratorium has been lifted. Pyongyang has maintained that the launches on 26 February and 4 March were focused on developing a reconnaissance satellite. So that's what they say they're doing with these rockets. At any rate, they've been unsuccessful. Moving to Afghanistan, Afghans are turning to cryptocurrencies amid U.S. sanctions. The use of Bitcoin and crypto in general has skyrocketed after the takeover of the Taliban last year. This is essentially the only way these people can access money because of U.S. sanctions, or Western sanctions, I should say, on the banks and the Central Bank of Afghanistan. It's basically rendered transactions and transfers impossible. So you can go and look at the Google Trends, and the data shows just a skyrocketing use in Bitcoin and in Afghanistan ever since the 1 second, I'm sorry. Sorry, my cat actually managed to turn on my oven timer during the middle of this. So, all right, back to Google Trends. Yeah, so if you look at the Google Trends, it shows that web searches for Bitcoin and crypto have increased in July, or began to increase last July before the takeover in Kabul. Chainalysis ranked Afghanistan 20 out of the top 154 countries for crypto adoption. I think I covered the sanctions of halt. Yeah. The U.S. seized $7 billion worth of assets from the Afghan Central Bank. Companies in Poland and France contracted, or that have been contracted to print the Afghan currency, ended sending shipments. The Society for Worldwide Interbank, SWIFT, also suspended all services in Afghanistan. So this caused a liquidity crisis that meant commercial banks could not lend money, and retail customers can't take their own money out of the banks. Starting to notice a trend here with putting your money in the banks. So the GDP has been 80% of the GDP of Afghanistan is actually coming from foreign aid and donors. So Afghanistan's in really bad shape, and they are turning to crypto to solve these issues. And the last story of the evening has to do with Saudi Arabia and China. Saudi Arabia is considering pricing some of its oil transactions in the yuan instead of US dollar, which will be dovetailing nicely with tonight's discussion of the petrodollar. So historically, since Bretton Woods II, I believe, all the oil cells globally have been priced in the dollar. So 80% of global oil sales are conducted in US dollars, but that level of dominance may not last, with talks about a currency shakeup between Gulf nations and their counterparts in China, which buys more than 25% of Saudi Arabia's oil, as reported by the Wall Street Journal. This would be a significant change, obviously, since our oil has been priced in dollars for decades, since the 70s. I believe that is essentially it for the world news.
Great stuff. Great stuff. Yeah, we appreciate you and Frankie both for the input. We can move it on to the topic for tonight. So if you go up to the top, the pinned tweet, that's where we're going to start off at. And we can just start off on the top left. And so we've already kind of touched on these, but we'll run through them again and continue on. So, yeah.
Oh, I was just going to interject real quick. So as we go through these slides, I'm going to remove the old ones and add the new ones. So the top left dot should always be the slide that we're on. And if you guys haven't already, be sure to turn on captions for spaces. It sure helps a lot whenever, people get interrupted for whatever reason. All right, let's keep it rolling.
All right, so we'll pick it up on the real GDP per capita and median male income, and the real GDP per capita and median female income. So I would love kind of kick it off with Felix and Wonder Woman's opinion or feelings on this, since they're kind of new to the panel. They weren't up here last week.
And that's the top left graph for you guys to know.
All right, well, let's get straight into this. The top left graph on thread number 5, just to clarify. So this one seems a little confusing because it seems to indicate on the bottom that women's income increased by a whole lot starting from 1970, whereas men's income did not. While this is true, the median income of women was much lower than that of men's, but male income did start to stagnate when you account for inflation, starting from a little bit after 1970. But for female income, since that was really the period of women joining the workforce and gaining more higher education, then there was much more room to grow in terms of women's income increasing.
Love it. Felix, you want to add to that?
Yeah, one thing to consider as well is, in the 70s was a very high social movement time frame for not just the United States, but the entire world. So in the 70s, you had Roe versus Wade, you had the Equal Rights Amendment that barred discrimination against sex. So that allowed for a lot of women to enter the workforce. So that played a big role too as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. Anybody have anything else they want to add to this?
Only that this first chart is kind of deceiving. You kind of have to step back and think about all the different factors that's causing the parallels with the the female side versus the male side, which is why we're here talking. So all good stuff.
All right. Well, we can move it on to the top right chart on slide 5. America has become a nation of dual income working couples. So just quick kind of breakdown. It just shows the drastic, or the 18% or 19% or so increase in both spouse working, as well as the husband only working drastically declining, and the wife only working slightly increasing.
So I'm curious what the panel thinks about this. I actually showed this particular slide to a female friend of mine, and her response was, oh, what I see is the middle class evaporating, because she said that, in the lower economic class side of things, women were always working, or were working more so than the middle class and the higher class. And now she says, what I see is that, the higher class of people still, have that single income from the male side, while, the middle class, that's disappearing. So curious what you guys think of that, as well as, your own individual thoughts of where this graph takes you.
Yeah, go ahead, one.
Yeah, my thoughts on that, I agree. I agree with what you just said, Floki. And the thing that first tracks for me is that it seems to correlate a little bit with the previous slide, that it tracks an increase in women in the workforce, obviously, but for both necessity and by choice, because of the women's movement of the 70s, higher education, but also with increasing inflation and lower workers' rights, which made it harder and harder for only one person of a couple to be working.
Yeah, go ahead.
Michael?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I think I finally got my tech issues behind me. You guys can hear me, right?
Yep.
All right, cool. So a couple of things that jumped out at me. One, I see a necessity for both parties to work to survive, which I think plays into that, onset of not quite dystopia, but just worse conditions for your lower and middle classes that now couldn't. You had two things going on. You had one, obviously, this female empowerment and this whole push towards women's rights and equality and things that made it easier for them to attain higher education, or more customary for them to attain higher education, and rights in the workplace. And we're obviously not there yet, and that's not what I'm trying to litigate either. But you saw less of the kind of typical or stereotypical for the time gender roles that you maybe equate to like episodes of Mad Men, is what I would kind of say as an example. That period of time where like the man did the work, the wife kept the house, that period of history. So you saw that in one way no longer be desired, in another way no longer be possible. And you see that kind of overlap there. I think what this chart also kind of speaks to me on, and I'm curious to see how it ties to another chart that we're going to get to a little bit later today, but possibly the beginning of the breakdown of the family unit and the lack of, two-parent households. And I'm curious to see, I know that during the same exact period of time, divorce rates also skyrocketed. So I'm curious, without knowing the data source behind this, if both spouses working considered people spouses still, even post-divorce, where that somewhat normalcy with which divorce started to permeate the culture made it so that both parents kind of had to keep many of their fixed expenses afloat that otherwise would have been joint expenses. So you had kind of this doubling of your fixed cost of life in, once upon a time divorce was taboo, but in the society where divorce became more commonplace, I'm curious if that also played a factor here as well, and how this overlaps with that divorce chart that shows, divorce rates skyrocketing also post 1971.
Hey, Michael, I do think you bring up a really good point, but I also wanted to kind of take a step back and also kind of touch on some of the other social factors that played, I think, a pretty significant role in the income disparity around that time between the male and females, because especially here in the U.S., you definitely got to keep in mind the whole notion of parental leave. The maternity leave is pretty much the norm, and it's only been within the past or so that you've seen an increase in the acceptance of men taking paternity leave. But at that time in the 70s, even though it wasn't a paid maternity leave typically, that is taking women out of the workforce and basically impacting their earning potential relative to their male counterparts. When you add in the factor of divorce, that's definitely a whole nother layer to the onion, especially, as you alluded to, now you have double potentially the fixed costs, while not even really having two truly equivalent incomes. And so I mentioned this as we were kind of prepping before we stepped in, but even today, the disparity between male and female earnings for the same level of work, the same exact job, the same responsibilities, that disparity is still pretty significant, about 70 cents to $1 for females. I mean, when you add a racial component to that, it's even more stark, the differences between, in particular, white male earners relative to black female earners. probably as far as the female contingent of the workforce, it was actually Asian and Pacific Islanders that are most comparable to their white male counterparts, at about 90 cents to every dollar their white male counterparts earn. And so when you start factoring in all these issues, the increased social pushes, that, for the overall, that definitely beneficial, but as we've witnessed ourselves in our lifetimes, probably one of the quickest way to screw something up is to get politicians involved. And so the implications of some of the policies that were put in place at that time weren't necessarily fully thought through.
And another note is that a fellow hero just messaged me that birth control was one of the most major changes for women in the 1970s. And so that plays a large role, really oils the wheel of all of this happening and allows for women to have more control over their fertility and reproduction, which also then allows them to be in the workforce. And forgive me if I'm missing nuance on that, but you're welcome to come up and speak also if you have the interest to do so.
Yeah,
that's an excellent point. Sorry, Floki.
I was just going to say, we encourage anybody with thoughts or ideas around these subjects to just chime in and say what's up and share. Go ahead, Space Ghost.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was going to just piggyback off of Wonder Woman, because I mentioned that earlier by mentioning Roe versus Wade. It really is kind of an existential conversation, and not to get too sidetracked, because it's a question of whether you believe the distancing of the end of traditionalism that was kind of primed in the 50s and 60s in suburbia America is leading to the downfall, or is it maybe quite the opposite, that such a being primed to that example that is actually so unattainable for many Americans led to the resistance of change, which is the resistance of women's rights, the resistance of workers' rights, the resistance of people of color and the civil rights movement and things like that. And to tie it back into the economic standpoint of why are we here, why did this happen during this time, it's important to think about nowadays when we look at how corporations and even the government themselves really push for the participation of women into the economy, is because now we have the data to actually study it, to see how much it matters and how much of an impact women have in our economy. We've even done the studies to see what economic impact do women's labor have that is unpaid for. So typical, house chores, things that would not be thought of as labor, is actually labor. And if you haven't changed your mindset, it is my opinion that, hey, it's something that you should look into, because it's not that hard. I'm not lowering myself, as a man by considering house chores as actual unpaid labor. When you do that and you actually treat it, as you would another person, and not just as, oh, I assume that my partner is supposed to do this through their time and their effort, even though it is unpaid, it gets demeaned as this is not labor. My work, me getting up, going to work, bringing home the bacon, all of those things, that's labor, that's work. Anything else that's not that is meaningless. And I think it's very important to factor that in when we're thinking about where do you want to take the future. I have a 2.5-year-old daughter, and one of the things that has led me into using crypto as my future is for her to be able to participate equally and without any sort of restrictions that have been historically placed by her just being randomly born that gender. So that's just something I want to put out there, even though it could be a very difficult and very touchy subject.
All great points. Any final thoughts on this chart before we move on to the next one? All right, well, we'll move it on to the third chart. This one is the income inequality in the United States from 1910 to 2010, and kind of just highlights from 1971 when the top 1% kind of was near or at all-time low. Since 1971, the top 1% has drastically increased. So, hear everybody's thoughts on it.
Yeah, we kind of touched on this one also last time. I believe we left off on the slide. So I don't know if we need to touch too much on it, but anyone else? I just added the next slide. So slide 6 is loaded up.
Kind of just means the rich are now super rich, right?
Yeah, just showing how the 1% is just steadily growing, while in retrospect, or like the counterpart is just means everybody else is losing less share.
Yeah, I get what was just said, but I also think that unfortunately the reality is that the poor got super poor, because I think that what this kind of speaks to me, you have a lot that got baked in. Not that the rich necessarily got richer; they already had pretty, unmatchable quality of life. It's not like they had access to more things by getting more rich. They'd already pretty much reached peak. But the quality of life for the poor was significantly worse. And a lot of that, to me, is attributed to also what they had the potential to transfer their value into the future with. So we've talked for numerous episodes about time preference and the way that the monetary system in this country has kind of force-fed high time preference to lower net worth individuals, and that people of means had access to different vehicles and different stores of value to transfer their wealth into the future. And whether that be at a simple level, access to stocks and bonds and financial planners and equities markets and mutual funds and retirement accounts and things that maybe you don't have as an hourly wage earner at the bottom end of the earning spectrum, but also the corruption in things like the accredited investor status, the access to parabolic investments and parabolic gains that are just simply withheld from the working class of individuals that haven't already made it. So I think that there's nothing wrong in saying the rich got richer, but I don't think that realistically, in terms of a change in their life, I don't think they got richer to the point where their lives became exponentially better. I do think, however, the lowest decile and as far as the poverty got worse, and poverty seems to permeate into the middle class in a way where your run-of-the-mill suburbs and your public schools within those suburbs likely have a significant portion of their students, or more significant than you'd like to realize, that they're meal indeterminate for the next meal, or don't have clothes for the next day, or are dependent on assistance of some sort, or don't have the assistance that they need. I think that to me is more drastic as far as how much poverty has permeated up, although it's easy to see it as the rich got richer. I think the unfortunate reality is the poor got poorer. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way. I just mean that it creeped its way up the class system a bit excessively.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. But in this chart, I was only seeing it seems like it's only discussing the top decile, which I'm assuming that means the top earners, but correct me if I'm wrong. But I absolutely agree with you that the poor definitely continue to get poorer.
Right. Yeah, this definitely shows that your top 10 decile is your top 10%, but to me the fraction works both ways. The top decile could either really be running away in the numerator, or the denominator could just be falling out from under it. And that's just the lens that I would look at, just because to me, a sticking point for me is just the accredited investor program and how corrupt it is, and how exclusionary it is for normal everyday people. And they don't have the means to accelerate and advance in the same way that anyone else would. So I think that it disproportionately affects them. And end result is the top decile succeeds. But I don't know that they're succeeding at a rate that's as great as the rate at which the lower deciles are failing because of policies that don't give them the same access.
Absolutely. Well, we can keep it moving. Our next chart is of Campbell's noodle soup or Campbell's tomato soup price rising. I think we're good to kind of move towards inflation and CPI. It's kind of covered, but if anybody wants to make a quick point on it.
Yeah, so we moved on to slide 6, top left picture. I'm wondering, did tomatoes get more expensive? Did manufacturing get more expensive? Did people just get more greedy? You know, what happened here?
I would say a little bit of all of the above.
I mean, I think that it matches and mirrors pretty well, though, the spending power of a dollar since then. If you look back at the lower right chart from tweet number 5, you're showing what your dollar used to get you versus what it gets you, at the point that graphic was generated. This is pretty much an inverse relationship of the spending power of a dollar.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think that segues good into the top right chart, the cumulative inflation chart, and just how absurd that graphic is from 1971.
The most absurd part of this graphic is that it stops at 2015, and if you had to look at it today, this would look like a speed bump.
Oofa.
Yeah, I can only imagine what it would look like. The next segment is the steepest part of the uphill, but yeah, no, it's crazy, and especially seeing a chart and a line go up pretty straight up is one thing, but when you start seeing a percentage, it puts it into perspective. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I've seen this. I've seen the more current one on the like M1 or M2 money supply. So what you're seeing here is roughly like in 2015, I think there was like something on the order of 17 billion of dollars in circulation, and we're looking, if we haven't broken it already, 30 billion. 30 trillion. There we go. So I think we've doubled in the last 7 years. So yeah, that's going to Michael's point. It's a blip.
Yeah, I posted a chart above. It's the M1 money stock. It kind of helps you get the point. But yeah, I'll remove that here in just a second. But yeah, we can keep it moving and move on to consumer price index. If somebody wants to kind of touch on the consumer price index and what it kind of entails.
Can we get a basic definition of consumer price index for people?
Frankie or Michael, is that something y'all would want to touch on?
Something crisp.
You can if it didn't fucking change all the time.
Yeah, to me, I think that part of the problem with the CPI and part of the thing that everybody needs to understand when you get the CPI rates that are published is that it's been manipulated to the point of not actually representing inflation, because it's the measure of your average change over time of the prices paid by urban consumers for a market basket of consumer goods and services, right, as defined by the U.S. Bureau of Labor and Statistics. But what is in that market basket of consumer goods and services? Immediately, it never includes things like that fucking can of Campbell soup that goes parabolic. It's arbitrary and it's corruptible to the point where, to me, it's unusable. You know,
Yeah.
to me, if they're admitting that it's 7.9%, I'm going to assume that you probably have to double it and square it, and then maybe add 35 from there. It's absurdly corrupt.
Yeah, I think I spoke about this previous space. The CPI was really manipulated in the 90s. They took out certain goods out of the basket that they considered. And also, what's even more insidious about it is that they've weighted it. So at any given time, if one asset is inflating higher or the price for something is inflating higher than another asset, they can actually decrease the weight in the equation so that it's less impactful on their numbers, and thereby lowering the actual the number that they give you. So say for instance, Campbell soup can, whatever, tomato soup goes up drastically, and that's a staple in the American, home. They would just simply dial down the weighted average of that, and dial up something that has a lower inflation rate, so they can toy with it however they see fit. And that's why it's completely it is not an accurate barometer of overall inflation, I would say.
Yeah, I think the next chart does a better job of kind of truly showing things that we see day to day.
Before we move on, do we know what those red lines indicate?
Yeah, major shifts in economic policy. In 1913 was the adoption of the Federal Reserve, and 1971 was the move to get a something gold standard. That's what I would assume, right?
Yeah, that's what I assume that they were in 13's Jekyll Island and the creation of the Federal Reserve. To me, in 71, that's what we're talking about here. It's Nixon shock and
these are the two major shifts in U.S. Fiscal policy that took place. The creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913. They did leave out Social Security in like 33, but 71. So 1913 and 71 are the two major shifts in fiscal policy.
All right. Well, we'll keep it moving. So, electricity, food, and fruit CPI, y'all's favorite acronym there. So, starting from July 51, when this chart begins, it's relatively stagnant up until little before 1971, but 1971 is when the drastic shift starts taking place, and then really after 1976 it goes dumb.
This upsets me because I love raspberries and they're so freaking expensive. What the heck happened in 86?
86 the stock market
crash.
Because we see a separate kind of deviation between, food, fruit, and electricity right around there.
Yeah, 86 would have been the stock market crash.
Hey, Floki, just wait until everyone finds out that 1/5 of the fertilizer comes from Russia, and we'll see some veggies and fruits be really expensive next year.
Yeah, fruit will just be
Interesting point.
Yeah, we don't know the half of it as far as how they're going to manipulate prices with this whole Russia situation too. And not to get too far off topic, but it was a conversation at the dinner table tonight because Russia's a pretty relevant topic for those of us that have family over in Europe because they control so much of the energy supply over there. But even this whole grain shock that's going to happen, or the price of grain went vertical. They have enough supply. You can't harvest grain like 24/7, 365. It's done like once or twice a year, and it's just the price movements that we're going to see in the price gouging is going to be so badly propagandized over the next until this bullshit ends, unfortunately. But it's just something we're going to have to pay attention to. But I would be curious to see what this chart looks like on a global scale and see just how absurd it's been over the past 6 months, even because I know that a lot of European pricing on these things has more than doubled. Like electricity and gas, where I was when I was stuck over there over the holidays, 5x'd in the 7 weeks that I was there because of Russia, and that was pre-invasion. 5x'd. So I don't know how all this toothpaste gets put back in the tube by the time this is all said and done.
Interesting. Great points. Yeah. I mean, oil's the easy one, but the long tail effects is, yeah, we're going to be seeing it for a long time.
All this manipulation you talk about, just so many parallels to what happened in Rome during the Dark Age segment. Must have been 3 AMAs ago. It's just wild how history repeats itself. I think we're ready to move on to slide 7. Yeah, that's up there. So it's the far left dot and the pinned tweets at the top. Let's pick it up.
Yeah. It's a chart of New York and Boston. So the yellow line is medium home price in Boston. The light blue is medium home price in New York. And then the bottom two lines that have basically done very little are your medium household incomes for each of the cities. Yeah, and these, I mean, especially New York is highly publicized about their home prices. But yeah, I mean, just once again, 1970s, everything's relatively flat and even, and then houses just boom right at 1980.
Yeah, I can speak to this specifically as a New York homeowner. um, I could definitely say that if you have the means in New York to get a house, you do, because it's actually a store of value um, for your assets instead of cash, because um, everything is so expensive and you don't get a break here. You know, it's like it's always getting more and more expensive. Um, and New York is a perfect example of really how um, in some industries wages are very top heavy and they drag that number. In reality, for me, I know that the actual income is actually worse, you know, because I see it. You know, I don't live in a very affluent neighborhood, um, and we've made that shift, as you know, Aldo and Obi, who's not here tonight, did a great job in previous spaces. You know, speaking about how we've gone from a blue collar country to a white collar country, and that really changes the dynamic of things. And home prices is literally like number one to that effect, because as you gain more wealth, you're always looking at ways to park your cash, uh, to create more buoyancy against, you know, other crashes and other situations, even if it is slightly illiquid. With, you know, with the tax leveraging, we are obviously very pro, you know, buy home, aka the American dream, and it's only exacerbated that. Um, yeah, I think that's what I got for right now. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great point about income because, yeah, I was about to say, I'm not from New York, but, you know, we all know there's a lot of money there. But that's a great point that kind of talking about on the chart a few slides ago, just the 1% kind of dominating. But, you know, I know the 1%'s not all bad guys, but definitely a good point.
I'd love to add LA to that chart as well to see where we compare. But I'm curious, you know, the title of this space is 71, and we see kind of a 10-year delay before things start to skyrocket. Is there any insight to why there was a delay versus this just not happening immediately?
Yeah, it was wages. There was basically no major wage increase. The middle class and the lower class was not making any money up until I think it first started in maybe turn around maybe 77, 78, 79. But even then, it was compared to the stagflation that happened in the early to mid 70s. So it's like you're getting right back to where you were, you know, almost 10 years ago. So not that much progress.
Yeah, go ahead, Wonderwall.
So, yeah, I would also add that I think that this massive uptick in 80 is also a contributing factor, would be the availability of non-white folks to own homes, which, you know, I'm more interested in whenever there's racial and social implications in the evolution of things. And so what happened with systemically racist types of housing policies is that everything was legal up until about 68 when the first laws were enacted to start to curtail the types of essentially illegal and prejudiced practices that were going on. Mainly the one that's called redlining, which is the lawmakers, policymakers, they draw lines around neighborhoods and rate them from A to D, and D is the red area, so hence redlining. And that was used as justification for mortgage lenders to not hand out any mortgages to people who lived in the red districts. And it was a highly racialized practice. And so that forced communities of color to go to more, if they still were able to buy a home, to go through it in ways that were less legit, going to people who were much more opportunists, and to use contract loans. And contract loans are where, for example, I mean, it's much more strict. You generally, the interest rates are much higher, so you're paying more for your home. And also the worst part is that you literally have zero equity in your home until the very last payment is made. So if you default at all, then you're just gone. So all of these, starting from 68 and then more laws enacted in the mid 70s, made it more possible for non-white folks to obtain mortgages and not be discriminated against.
Another great point to think about. Yeah, I appreciate that. It's something I didn't even think about. It kind of ties into it. The next chart, it's the average sale price of houses sold for the United States / federal minimum hourly wage for non-farm workers in the United States. So starting in 1971, it was roughly 18,000 or so, and now as of 2020, it's 52,000 ish. Anybody have anything they want to add to this?
Where's the farmers only graph? But wow, tough crowd.
Yeah. But if not, all right, we can keep it moving. The next chart, we are on the last chart for slide. No, wait, the second to last. So the bottom left chart on slide 7. It's kind of specific, but Australia total mortgage payments, percentage household income over 25 years. So anybody have anything they want to add? All right, we can keep it moving to the bottom right chart. How long does it take to save for a house? So yeah, we can definitely touch on this one. So 1950s it was 2.3, the 60s 2.6, then 2.4. So relatively consistent for 3 decades. Then from 1970 to 1980, it jumps almost 50%. To 3.8, and then it jumps up to the 90s to 5.4, and the last 2 decades plus the 2 years of this decade, it's at 7. So it just shows the drastic difference it took to save for a house from 2.4 years to 7.
Yeah, and I want to bring up one quick point, because it's especially when it comes to homes, it's not just so much inflation, yes, but it's also the scarcity as well. We have had horrible urban planning and horrible expansion, in America, where everything is basically asphalt city. You have to drive everywhere, so everyone needs a lot of space, and there's a lot of ways where you can still have a home and still have space, but have a better actual plan where there's more homes around you, where there's more what's known as flexible living spaces, in terms of that not everything is a single family home. Maybe some people want to invest in a multi-family home that they can reach their equity twice as fast, sacrifice some space, et cetera, et cetera. And we've done a very horrible job here in the United States of doing that. And it's because we've been tied to, like, how I mentioned earlier that, our prime American dream, 50s and 60s, suburbia, that is the goal. That is peak Americanness, and it must be achieved. And any kind of deviation of that is seen as something like horrible. So just something to consider as well.
Hey Morpheus, I see you, buddy. Do you have thoughts on the previous graph, given where you're located? What's up, man? Thanks for coming up.
Yeah, thanks, Floki. Yes, so I just wanted to add a bit to the housing sort of situation in Australia, where I am, and just to provide a bit more of a comparison to how things are, which are pretty much similar to a lot of the things Space Ghost just mentioned around, the American dream in here is the Australian dream. And yeah, I'm a migrant here, came here 8 years ago. And yeah, the dream was, things I heard was about, you must have your own. Sorry, can you guys hear me still?
Yep.
Oh, you're back, yeah.
Yeah, the story was, you must have your own sort of home, etc. And that's what sort of I try to do. The first thing I try to do was get a house. So just going back to those couple of slides around the price of home and how sort of it's very similar to what's happening in America around the higher prices. I think the similar trend is also in New Zealand as well as Canada. And some of it is somewhat driven by the fact that, the effective way to generate wealth for the middle class, or maybe people that can afford a home, the most productive way sort of to look at buying a house and creating equity through that. And one common theme across all these countries is that you don't get capital gains tax on your primary residence. So everyone sees this as the most sort of effective way to create wealth. And everything else you just tax so heavily. So I think the theme has played out across Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and America, like you guys mentioned about New York. So it's pretty similar in the capital of Australia and Sydney. Housing affordability is through the roof. It's taking a lot longer to build up a deposit for people who want to enter the market. Just wanted to share those sort of views from down under.
Yeah, appreciate you hopping up. We love input from all over, and sorry to kind of skip over it kind of fast, but yeah, definitely appreciate that. But go ahead, Michael.
So this whole how long does it take to save for a house chart, it also kind of leads me off on another tangent, and I'm sorry that I keep seeing more in the charts than just what they're showing you, but you're looking at it's showing you're now up to 7 years of your life saving your average income required to buy an average house. That's assuming that 100% of your savings was able to be allocated towards the house. But in this same exact period of time, the cost of education has outpaced inflation by over 1,000%. So we've already seen the charts of how insane CPI was. And in that same exact period of time, the cost of education, whether public or private, has outpaced that already obnoxious figure by over 1,000%. So now in the same period of time, with the same amount of money, with the shit stagnating income for most working level people, you now have to allocate 7 years of your life savings just to get a house. But when are you supposed to do that if you're doing that in parallel with also paying for an education? And then the rates at which usury was extended to college students and the interest rates that they basically offered has created this completely untenable situation, and we're surprised why debt is such a commonly misunderstood either tool or weapon. And in this case, I think that debt's been weaponized against the middle and lower classes to essentially hold them in this feudal system in perpetuity. So it's no surprise, I'm not a UBI guy. It's not really the way I lean, but it's no surprise that a lot of these roads all lead there, because it's created this subservience where people can't dig themselves out ever, no matter how hard they try. It's completely impossible. But it's not just at the government level; it's also at the academia level. It's pretty absurd. I wish that we had it in here as well, and maybe I'll tweet it and pin it to the top of this. But the charts that show the cost of a college education versus CPI, after you've just looked at the charts of just the CPI, would make anybody nauseous. And then in that same period of time, you're also looking at saving for a house. It's impossible. It explains so much about why we are the way we are and why so many people are so deluded towards success and those that have achieved success and the lack of ability for everybody to find success. It sows the seeds of just this class warfare where it makes it impossible for some of the folks at the bottom rung of the ladder to even see where the next rung is.
Yeah, the chart that I pinned, it actually has CPI on it compared with cost of college education. It's another. I just did a quick Google search, but it's another absurd chart.
Yeah, Michael, I just wanted to touch on what you just said there. And God forbid you do manage to bootstrap yourself up from the middle class up to, like, the upper middle class, and you're able to climb. I mean, what about the death tax or the inheritance tax, as I like to call it now, and how that's totally pricing out entrepreneurs and people that are finally ascending. They're literally kicking the ladder out for those people and applying a death tax on wealth that you've already paid taxes on and you're leaving to your family. And they're couching it as like, it's a tax against the uber wealthy, like the Bill Gates is. Like, those people understand. Bill Gates and those guys, they create foundations. they don't pay taxes, okay? So, like, the wealth tax, all this stuff is literally just class warfare designed to keep people hating, the person, directly above you in the system. And it is done by design. So I just wanted to add that. I know it's kind of off. It's related, but it's not related directly, or it's not on the chart there. But that's just one other instrument they utilize to essentially kick out the ladder for the middle class.
Yeah, I think the next chart, it touches on the same thing, and it even kind of does a little bit better job. It shows home value and income change from 1965 through 21. It's the top left pin. But it kind of just shows from really a little before 1971, and like 1965, they were exact same, and ever since then, it's just been a drastic increase on home value with relatively slow and steady increase in income change.
Yeah, and this shows to me again the increased requirement to have a dual income household if you are in a couple, because there's no way, like, just look at those lines. There's no way you can sustain buying a home with only one income that's completely stagnant or going below stagnant.
Yeah, definitely so. Anybody have anything else they want to add to it?
I think this is also a completely dangerous aspect of our lifestyle, is that so much of our equity and our net worth is sucked into real estate, which I think that's an overdue market to pop. And when it does, I think that it will again disproportionately affect your middle class and your quote unquote normal people, or the middle of the range.
Not gonna lie, if there's another housing crash, I'm buying.
Yeah, I wish we had Derek on this week, because he's got such a polished spiel about how real estate is a shitcoin, and it's such an interesting take, the way that he delivers it. But he comes at it from more of an ANCAP perspective, with you don't actually own the property to begin with, and what happens if you don't pay your property tax? You're really just holding on to it for as long as you play by the rules and be good stewards of your responsibilities with taxation and all that. But it's still an interesting perspective to hear shared that I've never heard delivered as well as he can do it. But I see we got Geneva up here. What's going on?
Well, I didn't look at the charts beforehand, so I apologize in advance for that. But I haven't heard any word about childcare. And if childcare, I was 17 in 1971, and so I didn't have kids then. But I was a single parent for the vast majority of my children's ages, and man, all I can say is thank goodness for government help, because there is no way that I could have afforded childcare for my children. And, right now, there was a recent thing that says that childcare is more expensive than college tuition. Now, it wasn't that way back when, but it certainly was an issue. And part of the issue was that when you had that wife that left the home and went to work, a lot of that money that she earned went for childcare.
Yeah, thank you for hopping up here. I appreciate that. And I don't have any kids, but just from hearing, coworkers and stuff, I mean, the prices for daycares, babysitters, everything is so absurd that even at my office, like you see women when they have a kid, they just choose just permanently be a stay-at-home mom because the offsetting amount to work and then pay for just the simple daycares and stuff to look after their kids is matching the amount of money they're making.
Well, it also prevents them from being able to purchase that house, because if it takes you 7 years to purchase the house and you're putting all your savings for that house and you don't have any savings at all because you're lucky to put food on the table for the middle income, to be able to feed that family that you have in childcare.
Yeah, that's why I think you're starting to see more and more so childcare benefits with a lot of white collar jobs. That's and just like dental and vision and healthcare. There's you're starting to see a lot of childcare branches of benefits in corporate jobs.
Nah, but we're still behind. I think we're actually pretty laggard in the child care, and maternal and paternal leave compared to the rest of the industrialized world.
Yeah, we're really bringing up the rear in terms of how much we support families who have young children. And thank you for bringing that up, Geneva. It also plays into like how you see that families and people who happen to have a larger family network and social network are able to somewhat stay ahead or to be able to tread water in this way if they're able to rely on the grandparents and the aunties and uncles to watch the young kids.
That's a good point, but the family unit has broken down so very much because, people move around a lot. And if you really have that family unit, that's wonderful. But I would say the vast majority of Americans, they don't have that like they used to.
Yeah, definitely so. We kind of touched on that earlier, and just the the divorce rate and the combination of factors that just led to the change or shift in mentality of divorce and how it's thought of in America. But
Also makes you think of healthcare costs as well, which we'll get to in some later slides. Shall we continue, Pepe?
absolutely. So the next chart is of some shitcoin. If somebody wants to know, it's official U.S. gold reserves compared to the price of gold. So it just kind of shows the extremely high metric tons the U.S. held in the Federal Reserve, and then the drastic sell-off and how gold's price was relatively stagnant for 50, 70 years, and then it's just been a constant upshift since 2005. But yeah, anybody want to touch on this?
Sure. I mean, to me, this goes back to the hard money, soft money debate. It's just at the point that our money went from partially devalued, post Federal Reserve, and once you weren't 1-to-1 redeemable for gold to fully just fiat monopoly money, you saw all of a sudden a market for hard money. It's just normal economics at this point. This is monetary history in a chart. You had no need for the gold price to really fluctuate much because it was somewhat pegged to the money that was in circulation, and at the point that the money in circulation became just dead presidents on paper, there became a value-driven monetary market for gold. It's as simple as that. This is the same type of market for gold that would have existed back to the beginning of using monetary metals. This is a history may not repeat, but often rhymes. The failure of currency looks like this.
Definitely. Yeah, great input. Yeah, if we have nothing else on that, anything?
Yeah, I would just add that when you look at this chart of the U.S. Gold reserves and gold price, it's denominated in dollars. So an important aspect of this is how we view things and how we think and process. So what I mean by this is we're looking at this chart and we're going, oh, well, gold went up in this many dollars. No, it really didn't. The intrinsic value remained the same. Because if you actually look at like what an ounce of gold could buy you 100 years ago, it's relatively the same. It's just that the dollar peg, the evaluation of the dollar associated with that has increased, which in and of itself indicates the level of inflation. So I'll give you an example, right? So like a 1 ounce coin used to be able to buy like a nice pistol in the early 1900s, right? Well, it just so happens to turn out that a 1 ounce coin can still buy you like a 1911, which is a very sought after nice pistol. Now, the intrinsic value of these things are valued by the market. Okay, so people know what those are worth. But if you actually look at the value of the gold coin and what it costs to buy that same item 100 years ago, it's skyrocketed since then. Now, it doesn't mean that the intrinsic value of like gold has just skyrocketed. It means that gold it has the intrinsic value, okay? And the problem is that the dollar has been devalued and debased at such a rate that now the valuation that we see when we look at this chart, we go, oh, well, gold just shot up in price. No, but what's happened is the inverse is true. Your dollar has actually been plummeting. So I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, I think it's a great point how this is really an inverse indicator, and you've completely nailed it. This is another one of those where it's showing you one thing, but only if you focus on the numerator. If you focus on the denominator, it's actually the inverse is the story that's being told here.
Yeah, I agree with Michael. I was about to say the same thing. I should have been more clear on gold price for US dollar, but I'm glad you touched on that. But
this also makes me think of the S&P chart, though. If you look at we talk about how in order to keep pace with inflation or to actually maintain some value in your savings, you really couldn't be saving in cash. You had to be invested in an index fund of the S&P or whatever. That's the only way to kind of maintain parity with the poor drivers of the American economy and inflation and all that. Except when you look at that same S&P chart denominated in gold, and it's a horizontal line from left to right. A lot of this, like Aldo very poignantly put out there, is it depends on what you're treating as the unit of account. If your unit of account is the US dollar, then a lot of these charts look skewed. If you look at the same thing in relation to a hard money like gold, then most of this insane price action is actually just a flat line from left to right.
Totally agree. Great stuff. Yeah, if we're good on that, we can move on to the next chart. It's actually not my favorite because it's kind of it's a hyperinflation episode. So red is price to double is red is hours, like the orange is days, and the light yellow is weeks. The drastic 1991, that was kind of the collapse of the USSR. So a lot of those countries were, related to that. But yeah, anybody has any input they want to add to this chart?
Or any history buffs out there that want to explain maybe some of the red ones that we see in more recent years. I mean, what stands out to me, and I'm not the expert here, is the number of hyperinflation cases now compared to back then, since we got off the gold standard. But
yeah, I don't think this is a very intuitive format to digest this information. So to me, I think what speaks to me is if you actually look at the political context clusters. To me, most people don't understand history well enough. They don't understand. They couldn't point out 90% of these countries on a map. But if you do look at the political context clusters as far as when these things happened, what do you know? 1916 and 1921, World War I, Versailles.
Treaty of Versailles.
Oh my! What happened next? 41 to 46, World War II and Bretton Woods. And I think that first line there is not supposed to start in 41. It's in the 30s there. But and then what do you know? There's 1971 again. And in look at that vertical column of yellow and red. These are, and they were pushed a bit. I do think that this is concentrated in the late 80s, early 90s too. But the time clusters to me are more pertinent than anything else. But I'm not a tremendous fan of this graphic.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I can add to this is I'm familiar with the Latin American aspect of the 1980s, and I can say that's when the United States was heavily involved with the central banks of Latin America in pretty much maintaining the hegemony there and resisting the new left-wing kind of movements that were uprising at that time.
And that was also along those lines around the time that there was a lot of globalization and development, creation of free trade policies with the IMF and the World Bank. And that's, I don't know enough about currency to say that it's definitely correlated, but it definitely led to instability in a lot of countries.
Yeah, great point.
We're looking at you, Argentina.
Well, I agree with pretty much everyone here. This is not the most intuitive graphic. However, the only thing that I would point out is just aside from the geopolitical associations, just look at the exponential growth in the yellow and all these issues after 1971. So essentially, when the world goes off the gold standard and central banks are printing everywhere around the world and providing that system, look at it before and look at it after, and the number of countries that are involved and the duration they're involved. Okay, so to me, that's the most interesting indicator is like after 71, everyone completely gets off the gold standard, and now you start to see this cropping up. And like I said, it's not the best graphic ever, but that's kind of how I process it. Yeah, it's just like, I mean, how many countries before and how many countries after? So,
Aldo, I'll take one step further because your point is correct. It is not to stay on the geopoliticalness, but consider it this way, right? All of these nations control their treasuries. So if you corrupt them and then you add, the printer go burr to the corruptness, you basically have an infinite supply of politicians and bureaucrats that you can buy.
1,000%.
That always
you should read the book Confessions of an Economic Hitman, where he talks about that.
I have it. I own it.
Okay,
Yep.
So it's fantastic, and it details that and how central banks around the world can keep third world nations or developing nations in abject poverty in perpetuity, and all they have to do is corrupt, and they have many methods of corrupting the local leadership, and they sign them on to usurious loans that they're completely incapable of paying back, and they just steal their resources for 30, 40, 50 years, and then then there's an overthrow of the government, and if the president survives, he typically he hightails it out of there to like some country with they won't send them back, whatever that is, and that's how that cycle plays out. So yeah, it's an insidious system, and it is happening all around us at all 24/7.
Absolutely. But yeah, let's keep it moving. Great stuff there. So the bottom right chart, occurrence of quotes adjusted for inflation, close quotes, Google Books. So just kind of shows, wasn't a thing, kind of the 40s with, the World War. And then 1960 it starts, and then 1971 it's just skyrockets up. Anything anybody want to add to this before we move on to currency crashes?
No, I think this is pretty skippable.
Works for me. All right, so slide 9, the top left. So it's a chart of currency crashes. So it starts 1800s ish, and shows the Napoleonic Wars, and then from 1830 till 1970 ish, 71, it's flat. It's just dead flat at zero, hugging the line. And then 1971 to 1980, it goes up straight up on the medium depreciation percent chart, and then crashes almost immediately after. Anything anybody want to add to this before we move on to all major currencies?
I'm curious if anyone knows, could speak to the peak of this graph in the early 80s.
Yeah, I would say that the Napoleonic Wars, what was going on there was France went broke. Okay, they basically depleted all their treasury in order to fight these wars. So on the y-axis here, you're seeing the depreciation, right? The depreciation of the currency, which they were utilizing gold back then, right? And what happened during there were 5 different French republics that took place, but essentially what happened is they bankrupted their country fighting all these wars. So that accounts for the spike in depreciation because they were spending more money than they could cover, right, for what they were doing. And then it crashed the currency. That led to the French Revolution. Okay. And so then after we see a stabilization, and then where do you see depreciation? And it doesn't even say Napoleonic Wars here, but it seems to me like 1971 is where it starts. And again, we just keep coming. These are just different displays of the same stuff, and this is just a historical overlay is what we're looking at. But again, it's 1971. When the U.S. and then the whole world basically switches to fiat currency, and so you're seeing this depreciation spike up and then crash. I don't know exactly how they would account for this crash in the depreciation. I don't know, Michael, do you want to touch on like how maybe inflation in the 70s went up super high, you had stagflation, and then I guess with Reagan and certain economic policies when we pulled back, it kind of went down. Is that how you would read it?
To me, I feel like I was trying to figure that out myself. I wish that there was more data than just these 2 instances on the line, but I have a feeling that it's more so that there's only so many increments of 15% that you could have before you run out. So I feel like they typically, this is likely a datum that needs to mean revert back down. But it's kind of hard because it's not a very
it's not
involved
chart, is it?
It's basically just saying that stuff sucked real bad in the 1800s, and then it sucked real bad again after 1971. But
it's interesting that like they don't talk about like the Civil War and the currency in the Civil War, and some of these other, historical. I mean, I could point out like several examples of currency crashes. I mean, many, not just the Napoleonic Wars and then like 1971. I mean, like, come on, Zimbabwe, the Weimar Republic. I mean, you have a handful of like South American stuff. I mean,
I think this is showing at like a global level, isn't it, though? Because it's trying to show the share of current countries. So that's why I'd be curious. I'm glad they give the source. I'd be curious to see if I could find a copy of it and see more context. But I think we're lacking context to be able to read into it, other than just seeing the the correlation with the 70s.
I would agree.
Yeah, and I think the next chart is a pretty good one. Actually, the next three are really good charts. If you want to move to the next one, all major currencies and have depreciated over the past century relative to gold. The thing that really stands out to me is how shit the mark has been. All three marks have performed to straight zero very, very quickly. But yeah, it just shows from 1971, everything's just been straight down to a relative zero.
And something I remember from some of the research I was doing earlier, as far as the U.S. dollar line, those are the different jumps. And correct me if I'm wrong here, guys, in terms of the percentage of gold backed up to the dollar. It went from like, I don't know the numbers. It's like 40 to 15 to 8 and then to 0 or something like that. Am I reading this correctly, guys?
You were in the blockchain for me, so hopefully somebody else heard you better.
I also wasn't hearing you there.
Oh, rip.
Looks like we lost Floki. The one thing that jumps out at me is that it's amazing. The mark went to shit post World War I, and the Reichsmark went to shit post World War II. And in terms of tying this back into current affairs, the ruble chart probably looks like a similar cascade off a cliff currently. So maybe the moral of the story is don't go starting shit.
Yeah. That's a pretty good way to fast track your fiat to already shit fiat to even shittier fiat. But
I know how unaware that is too as an American when we go out there and start shit all over the world. But I get it.
Michael, let me ask you a question. What do you think of now compared to those times? The mark, there wasn't really much of an alternative. You know, it was already gold based. Now we have digital currencies, and we see Russia with I think it's about 12% of total crypto, something like that. How do you think that plays into it now compared to in the past?
My fear is that it escalates the over dramatic reactions on both sides, because it used to be that you were somewhat humbled by something like this happening to you. But the fact that there's an alternative, what concerns me about our current situation is that both sides may be instigated into overreactions because of, and some of these new tools at their disposal may prove to create more fear and hence more bad overreactions than had they not had them at their disposal. But it's so hard to tell. I think that we live in a different world right now where it's become impossible to determine what the truth is. And that in order to do so, you have to take in a number of sources of bad information and then try to become a determinant of the truth yourself. I feel like we're panning for gold through stories to just sit there and try to figure out which parts we believe. And it's become so individual as far as what anyone believes the truth to be that it's very hard to determine what's credibly happening and what I don't know. I'd have a hard time opining definitively because I'm not sure that I've got a good gauge of reality right now with the situation going on over there.
Yeah, I think it depends on what next steps they take, and I don't think the overreaction might not happen because it seems like they're turning towards China as opposed to them making the hyper, digital currency transition. But it obviously doesn't seem like they're obviously not going to turn away from it. I think they're seeing it now as a positive. The issue now that I've read into is they've gone to areas like Saudi Arabia to try to liquidate that, to try to get some emergency funds. And they've had some issues with that. And now it's kind of put some eyes into Saudi Arabia. So that's another question as well, is you still kind of somehow still need to kind of liquidate that. And, you know, sorry, it seems like kind of straight out there. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of Russian accents in Dubai these days. It would seem it's not just Saudi Arabia. They're pretty much going anywhere that they can try to liquidate.
But yeah, I mean, we can keep it moving. Everybody's good on the depreciation of the different fiats.
Floki, are you back?
Testing 1, 2, 3. Do re mi fa sol la ti.
Loud and clear. I lost Felix at the end of that, though. I'm not sure if I'm the only one.
Yeah, I think I'm back. I think I walked away from signal.
Yep, I get you now.
Yeah, I'm good.
All right. Well, the next chart I think is once again misleading. I think it's okay. So it's the number of countries with banking crisis. The large spike, I contribute that to the collapse of the USSR and post-Soviet and European countries and the effects it had over there. But if anybody wants to touch on it.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the USSR, because that was what I felt about that other weird hyperinflation graphic. Was I was curious, these graphics, how many countries they're considering the USSR to be, pre or post. And I think that other chart kind of played both sides of the fence. That's what I'm also curious too. Like, are you seeing the division of the USSR into a number of independent countries, and that's why you're seeing it quantified in number of countries looking so extreme? But this is another one. I think the axes aren't labeled. It's just, I mean, I know that the axes are just quantity and date, but it's just another sloppy one to me. That doesn't really tell me much.
They don't offer a lot of information. So I agree. It's like the last one.
Yeah, so we can keep it moving to federal debt and percentage of GDP. So starting off from the beginning, you can see the effects of the different early wars. Civil War saw your first early spike, and then World War I, you saw a similar level. Great Depression, it topped a little bit above World War II, or World War I, sorry. And then World War II, you see a huge spike, and then it drops back down, and then 1971 occurs, a gradual increase relative to the overall chart, but up until 1998, got another crash, and then you see, and it shows up till 2050, so the dashed line is 2024, so it's a projected, but yeah, you can see it's starting to hit a pretty significant level, and then you got to take a projected for a grain of salt, but it's definitely something to consider the direction we're headed.
Hey Pepe, so when you look at that in between 98 and 24, right after 98, like you start to see things kind of go up a little bit, and then they go up drastically. What do you think that was attributed to?
If I had to guess, the tech bubble, something to do with the tech bubble.
Nah, federal debt. I would say, I would guess. I'm just guessing. 9/11 and the entire reposturing of our country towards being on a war footing and being in funding wars for 20 years. That's what I would attribute federal debt to. And
Good point.
I mean, because to me, when I look at this, that screams 9/11 and just reordering our entire organizational structure to fund the global war on terror, which would never end. So That's what it looks like to me.
Yeah,
Current
no, I
thoughts?
agree with you. You put me on the spot, and my first
No, I'm
thought,
sorry,
I
I'm
was
not
like,
sorry.
what happened in 2000 and 2001? But I didn't even. Yeah, no, I agree with that.
Pepe, were you born yet?
Easy, easy, easy. I'm 98. I'm born 98.
I know, you just sound young. I love you, Pepe.
So
Yeah, doing me like that. Call me a 2000s baby.
Pepe, we all know you're just an embryo.
An
What
embryo with no glasses.
Smartest
damn it.
damn zygote I ever met.
an embryo with no sunglasses. So one thing that really jumps out at me on this is if you actually do the math, which is pretty simple division, based on where they were projecting federal debt as a percentage of GDP to go, if you actually look at our current debt and our current GDP, we have already exceeded what they projected for roughly the year. Let's see, it was about halfway between 2024 and 2050. So it's that 2037. So we have already eclipsed where they project, how bad they projected the situation to be in 2037. Congratulations, we are living in the future. Unfortunately, it is a dystopian one.
Go ahead, Frankie.
Thanks, Pep. Yeah, no, just going back to Aldo's point, you know, I would say, you know, that there's also, you know, I didn't think about the war on terror in the 20 years that we've been fighting wars. But the other thing that I'd probably mention with the federal debt is, you know, this is kind of the start of the housing, you know, crisis. That's probably right around the time it started. I mean, going back to Felix and a couple other people on, you know, affordable housing and things of that nature, you know, I know there's more graphs here, but like if you look at the home ownership throughout from 1970 to currently, up until the Clinton administration, it was roughly around 64%. Now, you know, with the Clinton administration, there was certain regulations that were passed that made home ownership easier, and it lowered the standards, you know, for mortgage companies to lend to homes. So we kind of saw the home ownership gradually go up to around 70% by the time 2005 hit. So I would say, you know, that portion of it where it went parabolic there has to do with the, you know, more so the housing crisis and the government not having any tools in their toolbox, like I said earlier, to basically curb, you know, their spending. They had to inject the economy with all sorts of tools in their toolbox to help it not all fall apart and go into you know, a Great Depression again. So just another
Frankie,
aspect.
that's a great point. I mean, they did pass the Dodd-Frank Act, which actually gave the banks the ability to lend loans to people that shouldn't have loans. And then that led to the housing market crisis in 08, and then Bush signed TARP, which was the first major bailout. And I think that was probably around, I don't know, was it like $3 trillion maybe? So you are correct to point out in that time span, it wasn't just the war on, you know, terror that cost us trillions of dollars. It was also the housing crisis and the TARP bailouts, which that was the beginning of what would ultimately become quantitative easing. So yeah, that's good. That's good. I'm glad you mentioned that, Frankie.
Yeah, I was about to say all these different charts. They have so many different ways to interpret them and so much behind them. But we're coming up on 10, so we're gonna not run too much over, so start wrapping it up. I know we're getting through this kind of slow, but there's just so much information to dissect within this topic and these charts that we feel it's pretty imperative to give them our all and really go through them. But we can start wrapping it up here if we want to give everybody a closing and any final thoughts. We can start off with Wonder Woman.
Oh man, on the spot. Closing thoughts. I enjoy all of this. I do really like this process that we're going through. There's not many places in adult life where this type of in-depth information about U.S. history that's insanely relevant to today is discussed. So thanks, y'all, and see you next week.
I love the y'all. I don't hear it much in Florida anymore. I miss it. But what's going on, Felix? Got any final thoughts?
Yeah, no, I just want to say thank you, everybody who came out to listen. Also want to shout out the weekly panelists, the education team. They really put in a lot of time and effort. In the background, I know a lot of folks don't get to see it, but it's really cool. Coming up with different ideas of the different kind of content to bring out to everyone. And if you're a regular joiner of the spaces, you have any ideas of things that things you would like for us to cover, something that you would like to learn more or think that the community would benefit from learning, we're all ears. We're here for you guys, and I really appreciate all the panelists, Pepe, Michael, Aldo, Frankie, everybody, Floki, Sun Tzu. It's really amazing what you guys do. I know you guys don't like to take a bow or get too much props, but I want to do that for you guys because you guys are literally here every single week and I'm making it happen. So thank you guys.
Absolutely, and we appreciate you being up here and appreciate the kind words. Brad, I saw you hop up and wave your hand. You got something for us, my friend?
Yeah, just a real quick question, maybe something you guys could cover as you wrap up this series. First of all, really appreciate the info. I think it's awesome. I don't think it takes a genius to see that a lot of these trends are really shitty. So I'd be curious to hear, from the panel, what your opinions are on how we can kind of combat these trends individually, and then, maybe on a larger scope as a country, as a society. So that's probably a big topic, but I'd love to hear that perspective as we wrap up the series down the road.
Yeah, I'll take that real quick. Get out of debt, live within your means, buy Bitcoin.
No. Buy BTS. Buy BTS. I'm kidding. Yes, buy Bitcoin.
Yeah, buy Bitcoin on BTS. So enter the VLP. Oh, sorry. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and don't deify your politicians, regardless of which way you swing, because at the end of the day, they're just a puppet in a suit. At the end of the day, personal responsibility is going to be a lot more important than the way that we divide ourselves at the ballot box.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's something we can make a point to kind of speak more in depth on at the beginning of next week. But yeah, no, appreciate you coming up here. Sorry we're at the closing, but we'll speak on it next week. But we'll continue on. Aldo, I'll let you go ahead and finish and doing your closing.
Thanks, Pepe. Yeah, it was a pleasure to talk tonight. I really loved the discussion. I loved hearing from everybody, and I loved sharing. And I just hope to continue this. And by the way, when I said buy Bitcoin, that was not financial advice, okay? So you guys have a great evening, and I will see you next week.
Love it. Yeah, and we appreciate your world events and helping us get in touch with different parts and different news stories we may not hear day to day. So great insight and everything you add to the rest of the conversation. But we'll continue on to Frankie.
Thanks, Pep. Really enjoyed the content tonight. I just want to say, if anyone ever has any questions, feel free, to DM any one of us. If we weren't clear, I know I'm guilty of not being clear a lot of the times. So please feel free if you need extra information, need to dig deeper on certain topics here. But other than that, I love the intellectual curiosity that comes to the table every week.
Love it, love it. Yeah, and I saw CDP or somebody pinned it. There is a March Madness bracket up for VGX Heroes or anybody that wants to participate. CDP is giving 100 VGX to the winner. It's free to join. Join. If you don't know basketball, pick the coolest mascot, coolest name. It's worth a shot to enter. But yeah, and Frankie, appreciate the current events and kind of global economics. You had a lot to the conversation and help kind of piece these different kind of political statements and Fed statements that's kind of hard to digest. You make it really easy for us, so we appreciate that. But moving on to Floki.
Thanks, Pepe, and thank you for being the hostess with the mostest. So thank you so much for what you do, of course. And shout out to Crypto Airborne for recording and streaming this on his channel always, and cataloging and timestamping. It's really awesome. And everyone else who's helping with the timestamps as well. I know it's a group effort. Couple things. First one real quick. Selfish plug, shameless plug, excuse me. Neville, VGX hero Eddie the Head, also known as the VGX Soldier. He will be leading the Friday buy ritual this week. So keep an eye out for that. Going forward with the educational spaces, we are going to try and provide you guys with a little bit of, I wouldn't call it homework, but optional videos and audio and maybe some reading leading up into our sessions. So you can, just take a moment to think about what we're going to go over and consider contributing your thoughts and ideas to the discussion. I would love to hear more opinions and voices and thoughts from everybody. So keep a lookout for us releasing content before the actual space. And if that intrigues you, I would consider reaching out to us to join our panel as a regular or semi-regular speaker. I figure the more people that we have on the education team, the more we can divide and conquer and split up segments and really get some rich conversation going. Strength and honor, everybody, and I'll see you next week.
Love it. And totally agree. More input the better. Everybody has different perspectives, and you can see just from us up here, a chart could have a few words and a line going up on it, and we can interpret it in several different ways. So more input the better. Definitely feel free to reach out to any one of us if you want to join or even kind of have some guest appearances or something. But Michael.
As always, appreciate everybody putting in the time. These don't come together easily. So we had a particularly large panel this week, which was awesome to have, and some diverse thought. So I hope that some of our new panelists from this week rejoin us next week, and maybe for the next 12 weeks that it takes us to get through the rest of what the fuck happened in 1971. Hopefully we get this done before summertime. But other than that, just I think that some emails went out to the community about a Voyager event in Miami. I do hope that most of you have been invited. And for anybody that is going, I will be there that whole week for Bitcoin 2022. I hope to meet some of you folks in person. I'll be the guy that is standing there wearing Pepe Stallone's fancy Ray-Bans that I stole from him. So just look for me.
You'll see him. He'll be the cool guy. You'll see him. But Sun Tzu, go ahead.
Coming full circle, I am still Sun Tzu. I am no longer helping Michael. Turns out I banned him, so had to undo that real quick. And I guess without further ado,
Yeah, it's not working how you planned, bud.
oh, okay. I butchered it. That's it.
Quick point. Hold up. Yeah, so next week we're gonna try and wrap up this what the WTF happened in 1971, and then we're gonna look to move on to the petrodollar after that. So a lot of great content to look forward to. Appreciate everybody. Everybody have a good night. And Sunzi, you can rug us now.
I will stand